We all are at this interesting, challenging moment, but I know that Mary Eliza sent some questions. How would you like to proceed?
Why don't we start with her question, and then there's a question from Eileen Boken, and then take it from there.
All right. Wait, so start with Mary Eliza, is that what you just said, Charles?
Yeah, do you have her questions in front of you?
Oh, I do not. No, I that was like 350 emails ago. I have no idea.
Okay.
Okay, I will attempt to ask the first question here, which is a lot of us have felt like we have a need to take action on a number of different items. And instead of running around like crazy trying to figure out the best, most productive way to communicate with people such as yourself and other committee members and commission members, do you have a suggestion on the best way to do it? Is an email message to the group preferable? Do you like a lot of really simple yes or no on each item? Or do you prefer longer letters with more descriptions in them? And I don't remember what the other options were that I had.
Resolutions,
Oh,
letters.
resolutions, yes,
Single
because
comments, yes or no.
a lot of people have this idea that resolutions are really important. So we'd like to know what is the most effective, best use of time when we have activists involved to help them figure it out. Thank you.
Well, you're doing it right now, Mary Eliza. I mean, it is meetings like this. There is no right answer by air, by land, by sea. It depends on what the issue is and how you want to get it across. And there are different best messengers for different items and different supervisors and different mayors. Sometimes, volume affects certain supervisors. I am less about volume. I mean, if I get the same 100 emails that somebody pressed a button on a website, and I figured it out when I got the first, YIMBY email, and the fact that I got 99 more doesn't change my thinking about it. I'm a bigger fan of differentiated emails. I'm a bigger fan of organizational, and by the way, there's no right answer to whether it's a resolution or whether it's a letter. If you are sending a long discourse, when you outline things and say in bold, point number one sentence, and then you may have 3 paragraphs that get into it, but what I'm going to remember is the bolded thing that says, we oppose this because it is going to shadow the park. And then there might be 3 paragraphs about the shadow study and the fact that it at peak on the vernal equinox, it's this many hours over this many square feet. But I'm going to remember the bolded thing that says we oppose this project because of the shadow. So make sure that points are individually in bold or underlined so that you can take those things home. They can be set forth in a resolution. But I think, look, for different supervisors, and I'm speaking now about district supervisor dynamics, is a function of who that supervisor is and who they listen to. So like, this morning talking about shadow on parks, there is a project that is being appealed to the Board of Supervisors next Tuesday. And I met with the opponents and I said, hey, look, I think, for certain of my colleagues, hearing from the Chinatown community is going to be important. For certain of my colleagues, hearing from the Russian Hill neighbors is going to be important. So, I mean, you've got to, and you all know enough to know kind of what messages and what messengers get through to which supervisors best. And in individual situations, you sit down and game those. But I've never been a fan of, whether it comes from people I agree with or disagree with, the same 300 emails that say exactly the same thing, that half of which, by the way, say in the first paragraph, I fill in the blank, put your name here, and half of them actually are forwarded to me with the, you know, put your name here is still there, and they haven't even bothered reading it to put in, you know, Mary Eliza. So, and then, you know, what do? I swipe delete.
Well, thanks for letting us know. We won't waste our time with that anymore.
Right.
And by the way, if you have personal relationships with people, like there was, you know, I've been getting an email barrage about Geary Street transit improvements, and they are all the same. But when one of them at the top says Gordon or Eric Marr, I noted that I got one from Eric Marr, you know, because I look at all my emails. And by the way, in some supervisors' offices, the supervisor, him or herself, do not look at the emails, and the staff does, you know. So it really depends on how that office works. Like I am just have some weird obsession that I have to personally look at all of my emails, and I triage them, and then I'll send them to my staff or respond. So if you think that I'm, you know, and by the way, sometimes people say to me like, I can't believe that your response was like, thank you, received. It's like, you don't understand. I get 300 every day, and I'm the one who reads them. So if you actually got thank you, I received it, it means like, that's me acknowledging that I actually got and read your email.
Thank you.
Next, we have a question from Speak about SFMTA. Is there political will at the BOS to draft an SFMTA governance reform initiative, which could appear on the 2024 ballot?
It depends on what it is. As you know, the SFMTA is a creature of the charter and governance reform, which presumably is some change to the composition of the oversight body that is its commission, which, by the way, is a commission that, like the Board of Supervisors, has legislative authority. They actually legislate. It's interesting and little known that, and this rarely happens in my body, but you can referend, which we did, if you'll remember the 8 Washington hullabaloo of getting on now, I guess, to a decade ago. You can referend decisions of the Board of Supervisors. You can also referend decisions, because they are legislative decisions, of the SFMTA Commission. There have been, and most recently, I believe it was then Norman Yee's Proposition L, to change the composition of the MTA governing board, MTAB as it's commonly referred to, and that measure failed. I think, I mean, we can quibble about this. As you probably all know, the MTAB board is nominated by the mayor and approved by the Board of Supervisors. There have been conversations about changing that appointing authority. I have not heard any movement that way of late, but I voted to try to split the appointing authority some years ago. It's conceivable, but I'm not hearing any conversation about that. But it is only June of 2023.
Right. Now a question from the Mission. Mission residents and businesses are being fined for graffiti instead of being helped with the cleanup. What will it take to get the Board of Supervisors to repeal graffiti fines and support people in the Mission in the cleanup?
So I mean, as you know, things that happen on your private property are, you know, your responsibility to paint your house and paint out your graffiti. Having said that, recently the Board of Supervisors, well, by the way, during COVID, we suspended all graffiti enforcement and fines, and then eventually reinstated that regimen that's been around for a long time. But more recently have actually been piloting programs in certain neighborhoods. I don't think the Mission is one of them, but I could be wrong. I would need to check, wherein the city is providing at our expense graffiti abatement on private property, gratis. I know that that's been piloted in a couple of neighborhoods, and I don't think the Mission is amongst them, but I can check. Having said that, it is, I mean, generally been the private property owner's responsibility to abate graffiti. The graffiti abatement regimen in San Francisco is, because of the hiatus, very, very far behind, which is to say, if there's graffiti on your property, your chances of getting a violation notice saying that you have 15 days to clean it off are slim these days, because the backlog is so far behind because of the hiatus we took during COVID.
I'm told there's an opt-in version in the Mission, but the merchants don't know about it.
Okay, so then it does exist. And by the way, the opt-in reason, and that's true of all of our pilot program areas, is because we do not have the right to affix paint to your property without your permission as the private property owner. So you have to opt in. You have to give the city permission.
Another pre-submitted question has to do with one size fits all. It's very often rooted that each supervisor has to protect his district from a one size fits all solution. For example, for the Tenderloin, which may not work in the Outer Sunset, or vice versa. Do you think it's possible for each district to work on a program for their own neighborhood? It doesn't have to be a one size fits all that's good for all the neighborhoods.
So Charles, it really depends about what we're talking about. When it comes to land use, I am a big believer that different neighborhoods have different needs, whether it is our neighborhood commercial district ordinance that fundamentally was about different neighborhoods having a modicum of control over their commercial destinies by back in the 1980s, informing the way the zoning laws for those neighborhoods work. Some neighborhoods, and by the way, that's played through the next 30 years. I mean, some neighborhoods wanted to ban formula retail. Some neighborhoods wanted to welcome formula retail. Some neighborhoods wanted formula retail only by conditional use. There has been, I think, a very unfortunate movement in around land use to impose a one size fits all solution across the city, which I think is the wrong public policy. But there are other, so it really depends on what you're talking about. There are other areas of public policy that should be the law of San Francisco and should apply in exactly the same way to all neighborhoods. I mean, issues around, this is, you know, obvious and commonplace, but running a stop sign in the Mission should be no different than running a stop sign in the Ingleside or North Beach. So it really depends on what the area is. I think in the area of land use, the needs, the building typologies are very, very different. I represent and have had the pleasure of representing for most of the last quarter of a century, a district that has the same approximately 80,000 people that every district has, but it's geographically the smallest because it is the densest. So there are different, you know, needs in this district. There are neighborhoods where, you know, the buildings don't touch, and those neighborhoods have, you know, different, you know, needs. So I've not been a fan of one size fits all planning.
Right. Thank you. One question comes about the Outer Sunset Farmers Market. They state that vendors are struggling because of permit fees, and they're in competition with other businesses requesting permit fee relief, tax relief, etc. How could farmers markets compete with those other interests, or is it just first come, first served?
Not my area of expertise. I would need to know more about what permits they are getting from what agencies. There has been a general movement, particularly in the COVID recovery time, wherein the Board of Supervisors and the mayor are falling all over ourselves to reduce, eliminate, or otherwise subsidize a host of different fees that we are waiving left and right, which is starting to concern me, not because we are trying to give relief, but because I'm trying to figure out how we're going to pay for different things that have historically been funded by permits. But so I would need to know more about, I'm not familiar with what permit fees are involved here. But I would go to Supervisor Engardio and say, hey, this is, and maybe it's a one where it's, you know, wreck and park and something can be worked out, or maybe it's an issue of citywide policy. I don't know enough about the instant case to be able to opine.
Okay, thank you. One other question submitted previously was, what is the situation with Cruise and Waymo automated vehicles?
Well, I'm laughing because I've spent an inordinate amount of maybe unproductive time on that. The autonomous vehicle industry, and just so that we are clear here, Cruise is General Motors. And if you will recall, and sorry to invoke this ignominious piece of American history, but you may recall that General Motors conspired, and that, by the way, I am not using that term loosely. I am actually using that term because they were convicted of conspiracy to rip out our key route system back in the day, which we have at the taxpayers' expense, literally spent billions of dollars piecing back together, most recently with the advent of the Central Subway, you name it, the N, the J, all of that was our key route system. My father used to take the key route system to work. And those same folks at GM went and got the state of California to preempt all local governments from having any oversight or lawmaking authority over the autonomous vehicle industry in the great state of California, which is now being overseen by the Department of Motor Vehicles, that is giving them everything that they want, very few questions asked, and the California Public Utilities Commission, who we have petitioned unsuccessfully in various petitions, the next one of which is being heard on June the 29th by the CPUC, wherein Cruise and Waymo are asking the state for permission to deploy an unlimited number of these robo taxis on our streets. The city has grave concerns about that in any number of for any number of reasons, ranging from what is now becoming an almost daily occurrence with interference with emergency operations. You have probably heard of some of them. If you have, they are just the tip of the iceberg. I am receiving from our fire department 1 to 2 reports per day. The chief, Janine Nicholson, has gone on ABC national television about this. We've had incidents where they have run over fire hoses in active fire scenes, have gone through yellow police tape in crime scenes. We had a firefighter who had to break the windows out of one of them to bring them to a stop at an active fire scene. We cannot ticket them. Even when they run red lights, they are not ready for prime time. It is, and San Francisco is, because of our dense urban nature and challenge topography, ground zero for their testing and implementation, and we are all a bunch of guinea pigs. And I have brought the upper echelons of Cruise into my office to sit down with people at the SFMTA, the San Francisco County Transportation Authority, and our fire chief, and they, other than giving us platitudes, have given us the middle finger, and it is really quite concerning.
Yes, thank you for your response. I'm quite concerned too, as I will get to in my president's report from personal experience. But moving on now from pre-selected questions to other questions from the audience. I would remind people that we go first to our members and then later to people who are not our members, but who have questions they want to ask of the president also. So we'll start with, let me say first, if you want to ask a question, please go to your button at the bottom of your screen to reactions, press that, you'll get the raise hand button, and then you press that to get your hand raised. And we'll go first to the first hand raised that I saw was David Osgood.
Hi, Aaron. My question is, will you support us in protecting the historic Rincon Annex on Mission Street, which I'm sure you're familiar with?
Beautiful murals.
Pardon me?
I said, I'm a big fan of their beautiful murals.
Yes, well, the entire building is beautiful. It's 83 years old now, and the planning department just issued numerous permits to install, amazingly, 14 signs on the exterior of the building. And we are appealing 8 of those. Let me, by the way, I'm getting feedback from somebody, I think. Are you all seeing this?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, there you go. There's the 14 signs. The 8 we are appealing have the red arrows. Way too many signs. By contrast, the old Federal Reserve in your district has none. And plastering this building, which was designed by the architect of the Awani Hotel, with 14 signs is too many. Unfortunately, with all the streamlining that's going on, there was no hearing, no notice, no comments, and the only recourse is the Board of Appeals, which is not very easy to make use of. It's also very expensive. Anyway, we hope you would at least write perhaps a letter to whom it may concern, along with San Francisco Heritage, and hopefully CSFN. It's on our agenda tonight. Opposing these signs, there's too many. It has signs now, so it won't help businesses there. And anyway, if you have any questions, let me know, but I hope you will weigh in on this. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Dave.
Thank you, Dave, for bringing that to my attention. As you know, I have been a long-standing champion of historic preservation, and I'm certainly interested in learning just all of the details. I'm not sure how under Article 6 of the planning code they could permit that many signs, but you can help explain that to me. But I am certainly inclined, once I know more, to be supportive in that appeal as you go before the Board of Appeals.
Thank you.
And sorry, I just had to mute everybody to get rid of that noise. I'll try and, Charles, you have to come back on.
Okay, George, you're on. You have a question?
Hello, George Wood.
Hey, Aaron. Aaron Peskin, President of the Board of Supervisors. I hope you're well. I wanted to talk to you tonight about CEQA and the Housing for All legislation that's coming around the bend from the housing element is trying to, and so is Gavin Newsom from the state, making CEQA ministerial, streamlining it for projects. And everyone essentially is getting an exemption, which is equivalent to a categorical exemption. How do you feel about this when there are so many things that need to be reviewed by CEQA to just erase it completely? You probably know about the Cortese laws where there are over 2,000 sites that were selected by the state as potential problems with CEQA. And these are getting trampled by planning. Planning did not enforce them for over 10 years. John Rahm never even knew about them. And finally, they may be getting enforced, but nobody is spending any time at all looking at the ground, the environment. And I wish we would go back in time a little bit and start realizing what a valuable tool CEQA is. And I wanted to get your thoughts and how they apply to the Housing for All legislation.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, George, I think we are of the same mind. I think the California Environmental Quality Act that has been demonized again and again is actually a tool that informs the public and informs decision makers about the impacts, the environmental impacts, including things that we now as a society that has evolved consider to be part of the environment, like historic resources. It gives us an understanding of what those decisions will bring. And by the way, for people who think that CEQA is an obstruction, they don't understand CEQA. I mean, I can actually vote to approve adverse impacts. I just have to know that I am approving adverse impacts, and I have to acknowledge that I'm approving adverse impacts. CEQA allows decision makers to adopt findings of overriding considerations where we decide that we're going to demolish the historic resource, or we are going to allow winds that exceed or shadows that exceed, or deal with not address environmental contamination, or whatever it is. But it is a document that allows decision makers and the public to understand the impacts of their decision. It has been demonized by the development community because they don't like it. Are there instances where it has been abused? Of course there are. Due process gets abused. That doesn't mean that you get rid of due process. It means that you have a mature enough society to be able to dispense with frivolous lawsuits, frivolous CEQA appeals, frivolous use of CEQA. That does not mean that you throw the baby out with the bathwater. And that has been the drumbeat that, you know, the YIMBYs and the developers who fund the YIMBYs have brought. And I think it is something that California and San Francisco are, if we have not already lived to regret, are going to live to regret. And every little attack and weakening of CEQA, I think, impoverishes all of us as a society, and it's not a great moment to be living in. And I don't think it's something that we should be scared of. It's okay for us to understand what those impacts are. And yes, it costs a little bit of money, but there have been studies, including studies that came out last year by the University of California, that actually show it is not impeding progress. It is not making things more expensive. What is making things more expensive is the cost of sticks and bricks, materials, and interest rates. It's not, you know, what everybody likes to demonize, which is CEQA. So I hope I think I've been pretty clear where, and this is not news. I'm still the, you know, I'm still who I was when I first got elected as it relates to most things.
Thank goodness for that, sir. Okay, I just want to remind people that have asked a question, if you would lower your hand, and we'll go now to Lee Robbins.
Hello, Lee.
To see you, and so glad you're president of the board. They got you, so good. So I wanted to ask a more general kind of question, which you may or may not have comments on. We, as part of your district, the Barbary Coast Neighborhood Association, are in the process of, in association with the Downtown Community Benefit District, trying to start an extension of that to ours with their support and help.
Yes.
And
I've talked
it
to Robbie
seems to me
Silver.
like a good idea, as I see San Francisco is going through its historic traditional, for I guess it's for centuries, of downturn and upturn, damage and rebirth. And at the moment, we need to support that. And I suspect that other areas of the city, including people here from other sections, could benefit from this too. So I'm interested in any comments you might have about community benefit districts.
So I am the author circa 2003 of the Community Benefit District Enabling Law. And just by way of background, the state of California a long time ago passed a similar law that I retooled and adopted locally for business improvement districts. The People's Republic of, when I was first elected 23 years ago, the People's Republic of Berkeley had 3. The city and county of San Francisco had 1 at Union Square. And a large part of the reason for this is that the state EBID law actually was the creation of people who came from suburban areas where you do not have what we have in San Francisco, which is mixed use areas with ground floor commercial, residential up above, and the BID law only really worked in one place, which was Union Square. And so I came up with the PBID, with our CBD law in 2003, and now we've got getting on to a couple of dozen of them. It is a way for a geographically specific area, in essence, to tax themselves, if you will. It requires an actual vote of the individuals that are going to be taxed. It's actually a real vote that is adjudicated by our Department of Elections. And if you choose to do it, the money can be collected in a couple of different ways, but is mostly collected on people's property taxes and remitted to the CBD, that generally has used them to augment cleaning, in some cases lighting, in some cases business attraction, recruitment, retention, and in some cases additional public safety, whether it's through hiring of San Francisco police on overtime, or whether it's through other law enforcement or public safety mechanisms. It is not something that is for every area in the city, and should not lead to an expectation that the city of San Francisco should abdicate its responsibilities to clean your streets and provide public safety, but can be a nice addition, and has certainly been used in certain commercial areas. It has not really been used in primarily residential areas, which I think makes sense. But I commend Barbary Coast, which is one of those mixed use areas, for getting together with Robbie Silver and what was called the Downtown CBD, but has now been rebranded as the Downtown Partnership, because everybody has to rebrand so that old people like me will use your old name and get corrected every 10 minutes. I still call SF Travel the Convention and Visitors Bureau. But no, I think it's a great thing, particularly for an area of the city that attracts visitors, whether they're office workers or whether they are tourists.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one more question from one of our members and then 2 questions from other people. Mary Eliza, you have a question?
Yes, I just wanted to ask Aaron Peskin what his major concern is, what wakes you up in the morning that you really want to take care of?
Mary Eliza, if I could wave my magic wand and deal with the scourge of fentanyl and drug addiction and unhoused people, that's two things, because by the way, they are two, I mean, in some cases, there's an overlap between those two, and in some cases they are separate and distinct. That would be what I would wave my magic wand around. I also think, and this was going to be my rumination in the beginning, and none of this is news to any of you, that we're up against it, and we're up against it in a whole bunch of ways for a whole bunch of reasons. I mean, I think that, and by the way, not to comfort anybody here, but these challenges are not unique to San Francisco. They are happening in other cities and other places, albeit certain aspects are more acute in San Francisco. But on the psychological side, the lethal cocktail of, depending on how you want to count it, 3 years of a just debilitating pandemic. And I'm not talking about the physical impacts of COVID. I'm talking about the psychological impacts of all of the uncertainty and all of the fear that COVID induced, combined with, depending on how you want to count it, 4 to 7 years of Donald Trump and all of the fears of civil war and violence, combined with another virus, which is this, sorry, goddamn social media, has created the perfect storm of making people nuts. And then add to that the economic impacts of COVID, which is, and I'm not trying to get philosophical here, but is a fascinating thing, which is, okay, 2 geese have laid the golden egg for San Francisco. It has been the tourist industry, and it has been the downtown office economy. And the tourism industry came to a grinding halt and is coming back as national and international travel are happening. The office industry, where we put all of our, I mean, look, downtown historically was fire, finance, insurance, and real estate. But in recent years, with a lot of encouragement and tax breaks, became a relatively homogenous tech office environment. And one day, a lot of people realize that they can have a meeting just like the meeting we're having right now. And, you know, it sure is nice to be able to do the same work that you're doing and have the cat in your lap or whatever. And so the nature of work has been changed. The impacts of downtown are very, very real. And while these things are true in other cities, in San Francisco, they've been more acute because we had more eggs in one basket. And by the way, that was the gift that was never going to stop giving and was always going to expand. And the tech sector has, and this always happens in boom bust cycles, is reaching an equilibrium, which means that they're no longer just endlessly hiring. And matter of fact, many of them are laying off. And so San Francisco's downtown is in a world of hurt. And during all of this, you know, the government's ability to react and to collaborate amongst itself and with the rest of the world has been a struggle. And we've got some tough decisions to make. And I have to say, you know, it's funny, this is budget season. And I've got a bunch of colleagues who haven't been around as long as I have, and they're smart and they're capable and they care. And they think that all of the things that are happening in this year's proposed budget are really big decisions. They're not. It's going to get worse economically for the city, for the government. As a matter of fact, I have a counterintuitive take on this budget, which is it's a rather status quo budget. I actually think we should be making more tough decisions now and smoothing those decisions over time. I think next year is going to be a bloodbath because we are not making those decisions this year. The budget's largely cooked. We're wrestling with a bunch of, a handful of items. But fundamentally, I think that this government is going to have to contract. And I think we've got to get serious about that. We have always, in good times, and this is my third bad time. I first got elected right at the dot-com 1.0 bust. I was president of the board in 2007, 2008, that we now call the Great Recession. So this is my third time to this rodeo. And I think we've got to be actually more stringent sooner rather than later. The longer you delay, the harder it is to deal with at the back end. So there is my, kind of not happy message on that. Having said that, we will balance our budget by the end of this month, and we will do it again next year, which is going to be extremely unpleasant with very real impacts to people who need it the most. And if you haven't heard me say this, I've been saying it a lot, which is that good, mature leadership requires coordinating and not just dictating, and we need more of that. If there has been one silver lining that I've personally experienced, is that a whole bunch of people who have historically demonized one another are actually talking, which I find to be very heartening. And I will leave you with this, kind of hopeful notion, which is there's a lot of opportunity here, which is not to say that people aren't going to get hurt and people aren't going to lose a lot of money. But when the economy recedes, when the inevitable cycle of foreclosure of downtown properties happens, it opens up a whole new space for folks that are, artists and who do, what we used to call or still call PDR, to get back into that space that have, in the go-go years of the last endless decade of year over year, double-digit growth, been pushed out. And so this is a time to reimagine downtown. It's a time to have a more healthy mix of diverse business typologies. And I've been trying to temper expectations about this. It's time also to be able to inject a real neighborhood into downtown. I mean, just so that we're clear, housing has always been a principally permitted use in the C3 zoned areas of the city, commonly known as downtown. But nobody ever did it because office was more lucrative. There are many buildings there, not all buildings, that lend themselves to adaptive use, particularly the smaller floor plate, historic, governed under Article 11 of the Planning Code buildings that actually lend themselves to that, where you can have, more of what you experienced, Dave, a real community, and not just, I worked downtown from the mid 1980s till the mid 1990s. And downtown kind of rolled up its doors by, there are a handful of restaurants, handful of bars, but it's never been a destination neighborhood. And injecting, and the mayor and I just actually, in a rare moment of collaboration, actually just teamed up on legislation to remove a whole bunch of barriers to downtown office to residential conversion that will bear fruit slowly over time. I don't think, for politicians love to, pat themselves on the back and tell everybody that, you were born on third base and you hit a triple. But the reality is, I don't want to oversell it. It's not going to lead to 10,000, units of adaptively reused housing next year.
Okay, thank you for that uplifting ending. I hope that you will wake up tomorrow morning and there will be a genie there in front of you, and he will be giving you his magic wand to make your wishes come true. Do you have time for one more question?
Sure, yeah, I'm good.
Okay, Tomasita, and then if we have time still, Jean. Tomasita?
Tomasita, I think you're on mute, maybe.
Thank you. We're in budget season and we have a couple of suggestions about the budget. we would like you to eliminate all funding to the Bicycle Coalition, Walk SF, and the San Francisco Transit Riders, because they use the money that you give them to lobby the supervisors. You know, I believe that the Bicycle Coalition, with the $4 million, more than $4 million given to the Bicycle Coalition every year, which coincidentally was the same amount that the political pamphlets about closing JFK Drive, they were making a big deal about maintaining Upper Grade Highway or something for $4 million a year. Well, $4 million a year is what they just give to the Bicycle Coalition that has 17 lobbyists to just lobby you guys. So that would be a very great thing if you could just eliminate giving them that kind of money, because it's the tax, they lobby against our interests. And so it's wrong to give them money. And the other thing is that the guys who the guy who directs Muni is spending, they're crying that they can't restore bus lines and they can't restore bus stops after removing some of the ones that are most necessary for the most marginalized people, such as people in Hunters Point and Hayes. There's all kinds of disabled people who I know who have had their bus lines eliminated. And instead of restoring the bus lines, and then again, their idea of speeding up the lines, like this whole Geary thing. I mean, you know, there's no downtown for the kids to be. They're going to spend all this money, millions and millions, to make the ride from an outer neighborhood to downtown 10 minutes shorter. Instead, that money should be used to maintain the buses and to restore the bus lines, because the purpose of Muni is to provide transportation. It's not to eliminate bus stops. And that is much badly used money. Can you do something about that? Can you do something? Could you pledge to us that you will do your best to eliminate that funding to the Bicycle Coalition?
So let me answer that, which is the money came from the San Francisco County Transportation Authority. This commissioner, I'm a commissioner when I sit in the County Transportation Authority, voted no and has voted no every year for the last many years. And I will tell you why. It's very simple, which is I think it is wrong as a matter of policy for the city to grant monies to organizations that are involved in the business of endorsing people like me and my colleagues and mayors. So separate and apart from whether I agree or disagree with the Bicycle Coalition or the you name it, I have an issue with granting money to nonprofits that are involved in the political endorsement business. I have repeatedly lost that vote, although I am happy to say that this year I got to the amazing number of 3. Usually it's been 10-1, and now this year it was 8-3. So I'm making slow but steady progress. Asha Safai and Connie Chan voted with me, so that was pretty good. But I actually am about to introduce a law that will make it illegal for the city to bestow funds upon any 501c4 organization. So remember, C3s cannot, as a matter of law, do any support or opposition of candidates for any local, state, or federal office. It is prohibited. C4s, on the other hand, can. And the Bicycle Coalition is a C4. And so I'm not picking on any one organization. My belief is it is wrong as a matter of policy for taxpayer funds to go to organizations that get involved in political endorsements.
Okay, one last question, Jean Barish.
Hello, Jean Barish.
Hello, Aaron Peskin. It's been too long, and happy birthday.
Thanks.
I'm going to wrap this up, I guess, with a pretty general question, which has to do with a report that recently came out, which was covered, I think, in the Examiner, that said that San Francisco is the worst run city of, I think, 143 cities that were surveyed. I'm a bit of a research wonk and I have some questions about the way they did the survey, but setting that aside, I wonder what your reaction to it is, and if you are in agreement with the fact that that San Francisco has some serious problems with the way it's run, what would you do to remedy them?
A really good question. I don't know that I read the article. I don't know that I agree with the conclusion, and it would certainly hurt my feelings. But I would say actually that we collectively made a mistake in the 1996 charter that rules San Francisco today, wherein we went from a strong mayor system of government with a strong city administrator to a super strong mayor system of government with a relatively weak city administrator. Politicians come and go. Mayors like to put their imprimatur on things. Professional county managers, in our case, city administrators, and by the way, I think Carmen Chu is doing a great job and has made remarkable strides in a short period of time, and I am a big fan of hers, need to be empowered and need to not be politically interfered or messed with. And if I could go revisit that 1996 charter that disempowered the role of the city administrator, that's where I would start.
Okay, thank you very much, Aaron. Thank you for coming. It's been a pleasure having you here with us. And
Thanks for the time. It's a pleasure seeing you. You guys are like my oldest friends in politics and neighborhoodness since my days as president of the Telegraph Hill Dwellers a long time ago. Good to see you, Mary Harris.
and
May
I would ask you to say,
May I ask?
Mary has one last question.
Well, I put it in the chat. I was going to ask if you
Oh, I didn't press the
to
chat
run
button.
for mayor, and then someone else wrote, someone please ask what your political plans are.
I don't know. And here are my choices. I've been doing this for most of the last 23 years. I'm 59 years old. By the way, during that entire time, I've run the company that I'm here in my office, which is allowed under the charter, buying water rights to improve water quality in Western rivers, primarily in Nevada, which is a satisfying job, which the last time I left office in 2009, I literally walked into this office and threw my old Board of Supervisors cards in the trash and got my Great Basin Land and Water cards and went back to work in Nevada with the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe, which is very attractive. I'm worried about the city, and I think about, what needs to be done. I'm not running for mayor right now. I think about it sometimes. People have encouraged me to think about it. And to be honest with you, it's a scary prospect.
Yeah. Okay.
well, we wish you well in your
Thank
future. With the city.
Retirement doesn't sound bad either.
Sorry?
Everybody go say hi to Nancy Werfel.
Right.